Hi everyone, it's Sammy here. This is the Rapid Synthesizer from Wave Audio. I actually reviewed the original release probably a couple of years ago now. This is the 1.7 release, so there's been a few additions since then, and it's time to take a look at what's been updated. This 1.7 release is pretty special though, mainly because of the new GUI. Very quickly, at the end of this video, I'm going to go into more detail, but Wave Audio have very kindly given me 2 licenses to give away to 2 lucky winners. So at the very end of the video, I'll put a timestamp below. I'm going to give you some info on how to get into a chance of winning a license. All right, let's get on with the overview. This new theme, I think, hits a perfect balance. And if we look at what the theme was before, in my opinion, it probably would have put a lot of people off. It made the synthesizer look about a decade or more older than it actually is. And that's a shame because, in fact, the core of the synth, the wavetable oscillators, are actually really good. This is probably one of the best wavetable synths out there. I'm not saying it is the best, but it is definitely one of the best. So let's take a look now at the new features besides the new GUI, which you can see there again is a big improvement. There's another GUI, by the way, I want to show you that actually is kind of nice, and that's because it reminds me a lot of Albino. So I might even use this sometimes. Okay, so I'm going to give you a general introduction now to what Rapid is, what it has to offer, and then we'll take a look at some of the newer features for 1.7 as well. So, to start off with, it's an 8-layer synthesizer. We have 8 identical layers. Each layer has 3 oscillators. This is a wavetable-based synthesizer, and there are a lot of wavetables to choose from, and I would say all of them really good. There's a lot of similarities too, so a lot of them are kind of similar to one another, but to be honest, when you're trying to do sound design, it can be really handy to have small variations. Now, each oscillator can have up to 8 times unison as well. So that alone adds a lot, because if you're trying to make, say, a nice pad sound, just the ability to add unison alone can really help. Let's bring up the random here. Now, when you're talking about digital waveforms as well, this is especially true, because if you take a raw, bare digital waveform, although it's nice, I mean, compared to a sawtooth, it's missing a lot of the harmonic spectrum, which is what makes it interesting, but it also makes it thin. Now, I'm not saying that's a bad sound, but if you want to thicken it up, it's really easy to do it when you've got actual unison per oscillator. Now we can actually modulate this by right-clicking, or we could, let's say, go to our LFO, and we could just grab this plus, drop it on there, and we also have access to it down here. So I would say I haven't really been exhaustive. I haven't done an exhaustive search, but it looks to me like pretty much everything you see can be modulated. So your modulation is nice and easy, and you can modulate pretty much anything you see. Now, we also, of course, being that these are wavetables, we do have the ability to morph through them. And in my opinion, the wavetables on the synth sound really good. And they're very useful too. Notice we're not going through a whole number of unrelated shapes as we morph through this. It sounds very smooth, just like we're working with a filter. Now, some of them will have more variation in them, but a lot of them are like this. Really smooth modulation. And so remember what I said about the similarities in a lot of these wavetables. Let's take a look at some quick modulation on these now. It sounds really good. This is really useful for percussive sounds right here. So it would take quite a lot to get through all of these waveforms. As you can see, there's just a huge amount here. One of the things I want to show you next, though, let's bring up our random again. One of the things I want to show you next is once you've got your wavetable in here and you've got your morph set up, there are a number of further actions you can perform on the actual oscillator. And that's called effects types. And you can see here there's quite a few of those as well. So we can do things like add drive. Now I'm not going to say it's unique, but I can't think of the last time I saw a synth where the effect that you apply to the waveform shows up here live. So that's really neat. You can actually see what you're doing. You can learn a lot about synthesis when you have this kind of visualization. And by the way, this is just one of the visualizations. There's actually a 3D sort of layout, just like there is in Serum. But I do appreciate how smooth this is. So again, you can see in real time what's going to happen to your waveform. Let's change this to envelope. Actually, I'm going to set this to modulation wheel. Now, I would like to be able to tell this to smoothen that change, but one of the reasons why it is jumpy like that is because I'm using the arturia key step. So it's pretty steppy. Okay, let's move on now to phase modulation. Now, phase modulation is very much like FM, except it modulates the phase instead of the actual frequency. It's a sound that I really like using. And we basically, I'm going to guess, have a sine wave oscillator at the base of this. And we get to choose the tuning of that. So we can take it up an octave. And the modulation is really smooth. So in my opinion, the major strengths of the synth are the quality of the wavetables and the quality of the modulation you can apply to them through this effects types here. And also, I guess the visualization is a pretty big deal as well. Now the modulating waveform in this case is always going to be a sine wave. But one of the updates that was later added was phase modulation from another oscillator. In fact, from both the other oscillators. So if I go ahead and turn on oscillator B, I can now add phase modulation from basically any waveform loaded up in here. And we can combine that over here. And again, the ability to see in real time what's happening to your waveform is fantastic. One thing that I might actually email Parawave about is I wonder if we couldn't just blow up this main oscillator to take up, say, the majority of this space over here so that we could have a much more detailed view. I mean, that would just be a nice thing. I don't know if it's possible. Because I could spend a lot of time working on this before I even get to the filters or have them tucked away on another page. Or maybe even a pop-out would be fine, and I could just set that over here or even on another monitor. So I'd really like to see that happen one day as well. Now let's take our LFO again and let's start modulating the morph parameters here. Let's do this one like so. And again, seeing that real-time morphing. These bass and treble controls have turned out to be super handy as well. So let's take a quick look at some of the other effects types here. We've got ring modulation. And we could spice this up by choosing more exotic waveforms. And I feel like the audio engine itself doesn't really break a sweat. It handles all this modulation with ease. So let's take a look now at some of the other modulation types available. So these are all going to be pretty much single. There's no interaction with the other oscillators here. We have heart sync, and that's very common, of course. It's heart sync with a mix. One of the latest additions was the sync bend. This came along with 1.7. And there's two variants. This is a really nice zappy kind of waveform right now. Let's bring in an envelope here. Oh, I don't need to. I really like that. So it's a really neat way to create some new fun waveforms that doesn't involve external processing. So the way this crumples up the waveform is brilliant. Works well on this waveform here. So one of the things that I see this synth being extremely useful for is also percussion. And we took a look at that a little bit earlier on with the FM waveforms. So you get the idea of what the oscillator effects are all about. I won't go through all of these, but I am going to show you two more that I think are really good. So I'm going to load up a sort of maybe a glacier waveform, try to find something a little bit more smooth, and I'm going to go back to sort of pad sound. And let's do a little bit of modulation on the waveform. So besides having unison, so let's say we're trying to create a pad sound here. And this is not the only way to do it. You don't have to use a lot of unison. But let's just say this is the way we're going. You can hear that it still sounds somewhat static in the detune, even if you're modulating this a little bit. A really nice new feature that's been added here is the organic drift. So this is 2 parameters. Let's turn off our morphing for a second and take a listen to the first one. Let's also remove unison. So it really kind of chills out the waveform, removes a lot of that intensity on the top end. And you can see how it gets darker. It just smooths it out, so we lose a lot of the very, very high harmonics. Which does lend itself really well to pads. Now the next parameter here is drift. I'm only going to use a little bit of this at first. And you can hear a very small amount of pitch drift. Well, it's not too small, it's actually kind of obvious, even with this small amount added right here. But if we turn this up, it becomes a lot more obvious. Okay, so we back off a little bit, and then if we combine it with unison, another thing they've updated is the effects section. Now since 1.0, I think it was, I know the multiband saturator is new, and quite a few other additions have been made. But what I want to show you here is this reverb. So there's 4 new options right here, and these go from small to large. Let's just go straight to space and take a listen to that on a pad. Okay, now all that stuff you can check out for yourself. I do want to touch on one more feature that is part of the 1.7 update, and that's some new filters. These 2 in particular. They sound quite a lot better than, in my opinion, the original filters. Although the original filters are not bad, they're just they're quite digital. So here's the old analog low pass. It's pretty bright. And it's not too bad, but it's quite a basic sound. If we go to the new analog filters, these have quite a bit more character to them. Alright guys, that's my overview of 1.7. I think this has added a tremendous amount of value to the synth. I think if you'd bought this synth back on the 1.0 release, I think right about now you're feeling pretty good about the purchase. If you haven't seen the synth before, I recommend you should take a look if you're in the market for a good wavetable synthesizer. And otherwise, I think something to keep an eye on if you're not quite convinced yet. With the way that they've been developing the synth, I think it's definitely one to watch if you're not already sort of sold on the idea. Personally, I don't think everybody should go out and buy every new synth or even every good synth that comes along. But nevertheless, I think it's good to know about what's out there. Parawave Audio very kindly given me 2 free licenses to give away. So I thought of a few different ways I could sort of collect a pool of people to win these licenses. And in the end, I decided that it's going to be anybody on my mailing list. So if you're on my mailing list, you're in for a chance to win a license for Rapid. Now, I think that's fair because I don't spam my mailing list. I send out an email when I release a new product and when we're having a sale. So you're not going to get bombarded by emails from me, but you will be made aware of all the latest sound banks that I release, whether it's for sale on my website or it's going to be included with a newly released synthesizer. So if you want to sign up for the mailing list, that's on my website, sammyrabia.com. There's going to be a link in the description below. And of course, if you're a Patreon or if you join Patreon, you'll also be considered. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.